Legislative races happen every 2 years, but as Secretary McGrain mentioned, spending and competitive precinct races are setting this cycle apart. Amos Rothstein, campaigns advisor for Unite America and former executive director of the Idaho Republican Party, and Dr. Tommy Ahlquist, CEO of Ball Ventures Ahlquist, joined me Thursday to discuss why that is. Thank you both so much for joining us this week. Amos, I wanted to start with you. You're running for precinct committeeman. And this is after you were executive director of the Idaho State Republican Party. Why did you choose to go from the top to running for one of the grassroots positions?
Well, because the top moves when the grassroots grow, and we're seeing now a very different Republican Party in terms of leadership, in terms of style, in terms of how they are suggesting we pick our nominees and who gets kind of the nod from the party. Than when I was working at the party just a couple of years ago. To me, it's concerning, and if we want to grow the Republican Party again, and if we want it to be inclusive, a big tent party that is welcoming of not only new people into the state, but people who've lived here a long time and see that there's candidates that they can resonate with, we have to change the local leadership, because the precinct people are the people that meet with their neighbors, that talk to the people in their neighborhoods about the central committee in their county, and that inform them of things going on with local candidates and local incumbents. And so that, to me, is probably the most essential thing we can do to right the wrongs of, I think, where the party's gone, is make sure that sensible people are getting in these positions, and hopefully enough people think I'm sensible to win the race, but that's why I'm running.
You know, those changes that have happened in the Republican Party haven't come out of nowhere. They were voted on by the current precinct captains. This is something that the overwhelming majority of Republicans who attended the summer meetings and looked at the platform changes, these are changes that they wanted. And so is it fair to say that this is the direction that most Idaho Republicans want the party to go in?
I don't think so. I think that there was a very concerted effort by, I think, who took over the party and who is now the incumbent precinct people, to really narrowly target voters to vote the very last thing on the ballot and make them fill in that bubble. It is probably the highest undervote spot on the ballot, and by that I mean the thing left blank on the ballot when people vote. Because people don't know who these people are, they don't know what this position is or what they do. And so now I think there has been a slow awakening of the relevance of this, because I think the majority of Idahoans aren't seeing themselves, their vision, their ethics, their morals, or their policies represented by the current state central committee.
When I started covering Idaho politics, a lot of people had to beg people to run for those precinct positions. The parties had to beg candidates to sign up for this, and now they're not only competitive, but there's money going into them. And precinct committee candidates are not beholden to the same campaign finance laws as legislative candidates or county candidates or statewide candidates. Do you think that should change? Should we know who's paying for your mailers going out?
I think we should know who does pay for them. I think transparency in government and politics is extremely important, and I think with the talk of elections being stolen and rigged, I think whether it's not true, but the importance of it, the core of the message is that people want to see who's behind the curtain and who's paying for things. And so I think transparency is really important. I think putting the stamp on every piece of mail saying it's paid for by this person, or every call that you get, a robocall saying it was paid for by that person, is really, really essential to a functional democracy.
Tommy, you...
Hey, man, I wish I could vote for you.
Different precinct, different precinct. You, of course, ran for governor in 2018 in the Republican primary, and now you're really active in the spending arena between your holdings and you as an individual and your wife. I think last calendar year I found about $60,000 that went out to different PACs and candidates. Does that sound about right?
That's probably about right, yeah.
So how do you decide what races to tackle and which candidates to support?
Yeah, first of all, it's incredibly important to get good people that want to run and to support those people. I think the energy around this election is I really think it's really incredible. I think there's been an awakening of people that sometimes may not have paid attention, and I think that's why these precinct races are going to become important. And then it takes money to win these elections, and I think if you look at some of these legislators that represent your values and listen to their constituents and need support, we're all about that. And I think we pay a lot of attention to local civic races, we pay attention to the state legislature races, and we're paying attention now to these precinct races. So I think it does show an awakening of maybe the average business kind of minded voter, because these things matter. They matter in our businesses, they matter in our hospitals, they matter in our schools. And I'd love to get to a Republican Party and politics back to where we talked about policy a lot more. Yeah. We talked about education, we talked about infrastructure, we talked about things we have in common and how we can grow and maintain this heritage of this wonderful state we live in, and instead of all the time making it so crazy. And if you just look at the last week of what's going on between, I mean, the Republican Party of today eats its own. Right. It's the people they go after, the way they're, I don't know their end game, because it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense from where I came from and where I look at life and the way you collaborate to make things work, and how much we all love this state, to have people really self-interested and insecure that are making decisions that are I don't think they represent the average voter or average Republican voter in Idaho.
When you talk about people eating their own, you're talking about Republican infighting.
Oh, yeah.
Arguably, isn't that what you're doing by contributing in these Republican primaries?
I call eating my own the lies. I mean, I think that's different. I think financially supporting someone and getting to know them and what's in their heart and saying, hey, I like what you represent and I'm going to give you funds, is very different than having out-of-state PAC money come in. And I mean, for heaven's sakes, now Mike Moyle is not conservative enough for Idaho, and you look at what's going on with him. I look at what happened to some of the long-time leadership in the Republican Party that essentially were taken out by the current regime, and I just think it's short-sighted, and I think ultimately it's going to awaken a lot of efforts against them.
Absolutely, and I agree. And I think there's a difference between what I think most of the Republicans in the state want, and you could see it by who won those primaries in 2022. You know, Phil McGrain won, Debbie Critchfield won, Governor Little beat Janice McGean in all but 4 counties, and you see. When you go to the state conventions, Jim Risch and Mike Crapo being booed for not being conservative, which is crazy. You know, in the lineup of who is in the United States Senate, they are some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, and it really is a difference between a small government idea of Republicans and a burn it down idea of Republicans, where it's this very libertarian chaos, no functional government at all. And I think. There is a difference between a libertarian and a Republican, and I think that is what we are seeing in a lot of these fights in this party right now. Is that the libertarians have came over to the GOP and said, "We want in," and they aren't Republicans. Republicans believe in a functional, limited government. Libertarians do not, and so you're seeing this fight play out in these precinct races and at the state level like you've never seen it before. But we're not dealing with Republicans in the same traditional sense. And they love to call, I think, people like me who've always been a small government Republican a rhino, and I think a lot of people like us, like to call them liars, libertarians imitating actual Republicans, because that's what it's gotten down to. It's gotten down to name calling. It's this, it's a schoolyard politics. But I hope that these sensible traditional Republicans that made Idaho what it was, the Phil Batt Republicans, the Butch Otter Republicans, can make a case for civility and for common sense, and that's really what the fight is now, I think.
You've been a candidate, you've worked on campaigns, not just in Idaho, but right now you're the campaigns advisor for Unite America. Is there a role for negative campaigning and that name calling to get voters' attention? Is that part of the game, or is it not helpful at all from your perspective as a campaigns manager?
I wish it didn't boil down to that, but it seems to be what gets people's attention, unfortunately. you know, that is, people have sort of looked at politics, I think, especially in the most recent era, as sort of the sports team mentality, as sort of a sporting match. And, you know, you have to go where the voters are. If the voters want to see the fight, then hopefully we can make the fight about policy, and we can make it about...
It's a little different than that, though. I mean, I think it'd be naive to say negative campaigning doesn't work, because they'll tell you. The consultants you hire for a lot of money will tell you it works. And the game plans that they play are, let me find something about you that may have a grain of truth to it, and let me blow that up and put it in a way that you're going to look like you're a liar and a thief and the worst person that's walked the face of the earth. And that's the game. Unfortunately, that game gets played, and it's effective. So, I mean, I'd be a hypocrite to say we didn't do some of the same stuff. Do I regret it? Yeah, because at the end of the day, I don't know. Down in the, you know, you're out visiting people. I don't know how effective it actually is sometimes, and it's one of the regrets from my campaign. I wish we wouldn't have done it, because either way, you know, the results are probably going to be what the results are, and I think you could feel better about it not doing it, but it certainly works. They'll tell you it works, and they'll show you data that it works, but I don't know. They're basically accentuating lies when they do it.
How do you square that then? If you know something works and you want to win and you're putting a lot of money into it, but you also want to sleep at night?
You don't sleep at night, and that was part of the problem, right? I wasn't very good at it. I mean, you see these things happening back and forth, and you know it doesn't feel right down in the trenches, yet you do it anyway. That's why I'll never run again, Melissa.
I think I've heard you say that before on this show. Yeah.
I just want to say really quickly, I think there's a time for campaigning and there's a time for legislating. And I hope that when we see the primaries end and the legislators get to Boise next year, that they act like the adults that we hope we elected. And that the campaigning stops at the door and they legislate policy.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, the other thing is it seems like the fighting never stops now, right? So you know, you follow along these legislative sessions, and there are things that are important. I mean, they're really important to the families of Idaho, and they don't even get heard or talked about. There's not smart policy going on sometimes because they're fighting about these things within themselves, and I just hope that someone can elevate that. And I'm really proud of what Governor Little is doing. I mean, I think he's done a great job, both he and Scott Bedke, of saying, hey, we're going to try to be the adults in the room and look out for the people of Idaho. And thank heavens, yeah, keep that up, and how can we support you more?
All right, Amos Rothstein, Dr. Tommy Ahlquist, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.